It was a high-stakes political showdown. The stage was set for the ultimate clash. Pam Bondi, the fierce and calculated political figure, stood tall at the podium, her eyes sharp with focus. The room buzzed with anticipation. On the other side, the leader of the Red Wolf movement, a radical faction known for its fiery rhetoric and militant agenda, prepared to take the floor. His name was Kyle Hargrove, and he believed he was the voice of the oppressed. Today, however, the spotlight would not be on him for long. The debate was about to begin, a crucial moment in the fight for the nation's future. Bondi had proven herself time and time again as a relentless force in the political arena. Hargrove, though, had built his reputation on provocation, often resorting to extreme statements to stir controversy. What would happen when these two titans collided? As the moderator introduced them, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Cameras flashed, the audience's murmurs grew louder, and the countdown to the showdown began. "Ms. Bondi, your thoughts on the current state of national security?" the moderator asked, giving her the floor first. Bondi's voice was calm, measured, and precise. "Our country is in a fragile state. We face threats from all sides, whether from abroad or within. We must not allow radical ideologies to poison the very fabric of our society. Security isn't just about weapons, it's about the preservation of the rule of law." Hargrove scoffed from the side, but Bondi barely noticed. She was used to the interruptions. It was his next move that would spark the firestorm. The moderator turned to Hargrove. "Mr. Hargrove, your response." He stood, his hands clenched into fists, ready to unleash his vitriol. "Pam Bondi speaks of law and order, but what about the law that was broken by the elites? What about the corrupt system that exploits the masses?" Bondi didn't wait for him to finish. With one swift motion, she interrupted him, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Spare us the rhetoric, Kyle. We've all heard it before. This country isn't about grandstanding and villainizing those who serve the public good. It's about creating real change, not feeding into divisive nonsense. Your movement thrives on chaos, not solutions." The audience gasped, a wave of murmurs rippling through the room. Hargrove's face flushed red. This wasn't going to go the way he had planned. The battle lines were drawn. The next part of the debate would be even more explosive. Bondi wasn't going to back down, and Hargrove's anger was only beginning to boil over. The tension in the room reached a fever pitch as Hargrove's face turned an even deeper shade of crimson. The audience was on the edge of their seats, waiting for the next move. Bondi, ever poised, stood unwavering, her confidence practically radiating off her like a shield. Hargrove, unable to contain his fury, slammed his fist against the podium. "You think you can dismiss me like that? You think you're better than the people I represent?" Hargrove's voice cracked with rage. "The system you defend is corrupt to its core. It's rigged to protect your kind, privileged, wealthy, and out of touch with the struggles of real Americans." Bondi didn't flinch. Her sharp gaze locked onto his. "Kyle, you're playing into the hands of division. Your movement thrives on anger, not reason. You don't represent the people, you represent chaos. You're nothing but a puppet for those who want to tear this country apart." A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. Bondi's words had hit their mark, but Hargrove wasn't ready to let her win so easily. He leaned forward, his fists clenched tighter, and his voice dropped into a menacing growl. "You think you've got it all figured out? That you're some kind of hero for the status quo?" His eyes glinted with a dangerous intensity. "I know what you are, Pam. You're the face of the establishment that's been lying to the people for years. Your policies have only pushed this country to the brink of destruction. And I'm here to make sure everyone sees you for what you really are, a part of the system that's ruining us." Bondi's expression didn't change. She was calm, too calm, and that was precisely what unnerved Hargrove. He could see it in the way her eyes never left him, unshaken by his anger. "Let's be clear," Bondi responded, her voice low but firm. "What you're doing isn't revolution. It's destruction. You may think you're a champion of the people, but your words incite violence and chaos. People like you want to tear down everything just to watch it burn. But I'm not here for the theatrics. I'm here to fight for a future, for security, for progress. Hargrove's jaw tightened. He knew she was right in some respects, but the radical movement he had built was his life's work, his purpose. He wasn't about to back down, not with the cameras rolling, not with the world watching. You're a coward, Pam, he hissed. You'll never understand what it means to truly fight for the people, to stand up to the establishment. You'll never understand what it means to face the consequences of real change. Bondi stepped forward slightly, narrowing the space between them, her voice now cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. I understand more than you think, Kyle. And I'm not afraid of you. You'll break under pressure. The radicals always do. Hargrove's eyes widened, his chest heaving with emotion. This was no longer a debate, it was a battle for his very identity. But as the heat between them built to a boiling point, something began to shift. Pam Bondi wasn't just dismantling his arguments. She was dismantling him. And that would be something he couldn't survive. The air in the room felt thick, oppressive, as if it could crack open at any moment. Hargrove's fingers were white-knuckled, gripping the edge of the podium. He was seething, and everyone in the room could see it. Bondi, on the other hand, was the picture of calm. She had faced far worse than Hargrove's outbursts and had come out victorious every single time. The clock ticked on, but the debate had lost its focus. This wasn't about policy anymore, it was about dominance. And Bondi had already proven she was the one in control. Hargrove tried to recover. He threw his shoulders back and took a deep breath, attempting to regain his composure. His voice now had an edge of desperation. You think you've got this all figured out, don't you? You think you're some kind of protector of the status quo. But there's a reckoning coming, Pam. You can't keep pretending that you've got all the answers. Your way is failing, and everyone knows it. Bondi took a measured step forward, her eyes locked onto his with unblinking intensity. Kyle, you're too blinded by your ideology to see what's right in front of you. The country doesn't need more of your anger. What it needs is solutions, stability, and security. Not rhetoric that puts people's lives in jeopardy. The room was utterly still. Every word she spoke sliced through the tension like a blade. Hargrove was rattled now. He had expected the crowd to rally behind him, to cheer for his every word. But instead, they were silent. The weight of Bondi's words pressed down on him, and he was beginning to realize just how far out of his depth he truly was. You think your little speeches about power and revolution will fix this? Bondi continued, her voice cutting sharp and low. You're not bringing about change, Kyle. You're pushing people to the edge. And they're starting to see you for what you really are, a coward hiding behind a banner of false promises. That hit him hard. Hargrove's jaw clenched so tightly that it looked like he might break something. His breath came in shallow bursts, his eyes wild. He looked ready to snap, to lunge at her across the stage. But something in his chest tightened, as if all his fury was turning inward. Was it possible that Bondi had gotten under his skin more than he'd ever wanted to admit? The silence stretched on, broken only by the hum of the cameras. He could feel the weight of their gaze, the entire nation was watching. His movement, his cause, everything he had worked for, was hanging in the balance. And then, it happened. Hargrove's voice cracked. You don't get it, he muttered, almost to himself. His eyes darted around, searching for support, but the room remained eerily quiet, all eyes on him. You're the one who's going to fail. You're the one who's going to break. Pam Bondi didn't move. She stood there, unshaken, her gaze never wavering. She knew she had him. You've already broken, Kyle, she said softly. You just don't realize it yet. The audience, once tense and unsure, was now staring in stunned silence, watching as Hargrove faltered, the facade of the fearless leader crumbling right in front of their eyes. His entire movement, his radical ideals, the image he had built, it was all beginning to unravel. The heat was too much. He couldn't survive it. The words hit Hargrove like a physical blow. He stood frozen, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something to latch onto, some form of validation. But there was nothing. The audience had turned on him without a single word spoken. His grip on the podium loosened, and for a moment, he looked lost, completely out of place, out of control. Bondi, ever the strategist, didn't press. She didn't need to. The damage was done. Her cool, deliberate approach had methodically broken down his defenses. She could feel the shift in the room, the subtle change in the air as the crowd began to sense that Hargrove's facade was beginning to collapse. Hargrove cleared his throat, a hollow sound, and for a fleeting second, there was a pitiful attempt at regaining his authority. "You think you've won? You think your words have destroyed me?" His voice shook, and the conviction was gone, replaced with a hollow, desperate edge. Pam Bondi's expression softened for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough for the crowd to see the truth. She had won. She had crushed him, not through force, but through her calm precision and unwavering confidence. It wasn't the power of words that had done it, it was the simple, undeniable fact that she was right. And everyone could see it. "You've already lost, Kyle," she said once more, her voice a calm whisper in the charged air. "And you'll never get back what you've lost in this moment. You came here to make a statement, but you've exposed your true colors to the world. And they're not the colors of a leader. They're the colors of a desperate man who thought he could incite a revolution but forgot what it takes to truly lead." Hargrove's shoulders slumped, and he took a step back from the podium, as if the weight of her words had physically drained him. The crowd sat in stunned silence, no applause, no chants, just the heavy realization that this radical, this supposed savior of the people, was no more than a shadow of the figure they had believed him to be. Bondi's voice, sharp as ever, rang out once more. "This is over, Kyle. Your movement is over. The people have seen your true nature. And what's left now is the consequences of your actions." It wasn't even the audience that made the final judgment, it was the weight of reality. Hargrove had overplayed his hand. He thought his radicalism would ignite a fire, but instead, it had scorched him. The people, no matter how angry or disillusioned, didn't want anarchy. They wanted stability, they wanted security, and they wanted leadership. Hargrove had failed to offer any of that. He had offered only chaos. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of his defeat. Hargrove's eyes scanned the room for a final ounce of support, but all he found was the cold, unblinking gaze of those who had seen the truth. With a final glance at Bondi, he turned and walked off the stage. The room was silent as his footsteps echoed in the distance, a symbol of his fall from power. His radical dream had burned out, and there was nothing left but the ashes of his failure. Pam Bondi stood at the podium, her expression unchanged, as the audience slowly came to life. They began to applaud, quietly at first, but then with growing intensity. It wasn't just a cheer for her, it was a cheer for the truth, for the victory of reason over chaos. For the preservation of order and the rejection of destruction. Bondi had crushed the Red Wolf leader, and in doing so, had delivered a crushing blow to the very movement that threatened to unravel the fabric of the nation. And as she stood there, the applause echoing in her ears, she knew this was only the beginning. There would be more battles to fight. But this one was hers. The applause reverberated through the hall, but Pam Bondi barely acknowledged it. Her mind was already focused on the next move. She had successfully dismantled Hargrove's radical movement in front of the nation, but the war wasn't over. Far from it. There would be those who would still rally to his cause, still cling to the dangerous rhetoric he had spread, even if they were now on the back foot. The media storm had already begun. News outlets scrambled to cover the aftermath of the debate, their focus split between Bondi's decisive performance and Hargrove's stunning collapse. But as the hours passed, the narrative began to take shape. The Red Wolf movement had been dealt a serious blow, its leader exposed as nothing more than a man of empty words, a man whose rhetoric was built on rage and resentment, not solutions. As the debate ended and the cameras were shut off, Bondi stepped off the stage, her expression thoughtful, her mind sharp. She was already analyzing every aspect of the exchange, already preparing for the next phase. She knew that while the immediate victory was significant, it was only a single battle in a larger war. Hargrove was finished, but the seeds of his movement had already been planted. Those who followed him would need to be dealt with, one by one, in their own time. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. As she made her way down the corridor backstage, her team was already surrounding her, giving their congratulatory nods and murmurs of approval. She nodded curtly, her focus unbroken. There would be time for celebration later. Right now, she needed to turn her attention to the next step. "You've done it, Pam," one of her advisors said, his voice low but full of respect. "That was impressive." Bondi gave him a small smile. "Impressive doesn't win wars. Results do." They continued walking through the backstage area, the noise of the press and the buzzing lights in the background fading as they reached a private room. It was there, away from the cameras and the chaos, that she allowed herself to sit for a moment, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "So, what now?" one of her senior strategists asked, leaning in. "Do we push for legislation, or do we hit back at the remaining factions?" Bondi's eyes narrowed. "We do both. First, we make sure the Red Wolf movement is completely discredited. We need to expose every connection they have, every radical they've empowered. People like Hargrove thrive on the fringe, and we can't let that go unnoticed. But we also need to introduce a counter-narrative, one that puts our vision for the future front and center. The people want change, but they want real, tangible solutions. Not empty promises." Her strategist nodded, his face already a mask of concentration. "Understood. And the media?" "Leverage the victory," Bondi said with a sharp edge to her voice. "It's time to paint Hargrove's collapse as a symbol of what happens when you give in to the radical voices. We need to ensure the narrative sticks. That's how we'll keep the pressure on." A few minutes later, Bondi's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from her communications director. The headlines had already been set. "Pam Bondi crushes Red Wolf leader, the radical couldn't survive the heat." The words jumped out at her, and she felt a momentary flicker of pride. It was the kind of headline that would dominate news cycles for days. But she quickly wiped away any hint of self-satisfaction. "This isn't over." "Not by a long shot," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else in the room. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed her words. The victory was sweet, but the road ahead would be much tougher. Radical ideologies had their place in history, and while they could be crushed in a debate, they never truly disappeared. It was up to Bondi to ensure that the Red Wolf movement, and those like it, wouldn't have a place in the future. For now, though, the battle had been won. The people had seen Hargrove's defeat, and it was a message loud and clear: the radicals couldn't survive the heat. Pam Bondi had delivered the blow, and the nation was watching. The days following the debate were a whirlwind of media appearances, strategic meetings, and mounting pressure. Pam Bondi, ever the tactician, used the momentum from her crushing victory over Hargrove to solidify her position as the face of political reason and stability. But beneath the surface, the quiet hum of her next moves was already taking shape. She knew that the battle for the nation's future wasn't about to end with a single debate. The Red Wolf movement, while significantly weakened, still had a presence. Hargrove's followers were scattered, angry, and desperate. They would regroup. They would try to rally behind new leaders. Bondi knew it wasn't enough to simply wait for them to implode. She had to press the attack, keep the pressure on them until they were a shadow of the threat they once were. At her private office, Bondi reviewed intelligence reports on Red Wolf cells across the country. While the media was focused on the immediate aftermath of the debate, Bondi's team was quietly compiling a comprehensive list of individuals linked to the movement. Some were radical activists, others were fringe political figures eager to stoke the fire Hargrove had started. She would not let them rise again. Her phone buzzed again, another message. It was from her press director. The media is turning on Hargrove. They're starting to question his credibility, it's all falling apart. But there's a group of his supporters planning a rally tomorrow. Should we address it directly? Bondi sat back in her chair, considering her options. She knew this rally could either reignite Hargrove's movement or crush it completely. The question was whether to let it burn out on its own or make a statement. She had built her career on controlling narratives, not reacting to them. We'll address it, Bondi said, her voice firm. But we'll do it on our terms. Get a press conference set up for tomorrow. We'll meet the media head-on. Her advisor nodded and walked out, leaving Bondi alone in her thoughts. As she stared at the mountain of papers on her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that Hargrove's defeat was just a small part of something much bigger. Radical ideologies had a way of resurfacing, especially when people felt powerless. Hargrove was just the latest face of that kind of extremism. But Bondi wasn't someone who allowed a threat to fester. She would strike first. She would dismantle the movement piece by piece, using the full weight of her influence and the law. And she would make sure that the message was clear: chaos had no place in the future she envisioned for the country. The following day, Bondi stood before the cameras once again, her face composed, her message clear. Behind her, a giant screen displayed images of the rally, angry crowds chanting and waving flags adorned with the red wolf symbol. We've seen what happens when we allow radicals to take root, Bondi began, her voice calm but resolute. They stir anger. They create division. But most importantly, they breed fear. Fear that things will never get better. Fear that we are powerless to stop the chaos. But I'm here to tell you today that fear is what keeps them going. And fear is what they rely on. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the audience. The press was hanging on every syllable. Bondi had this moment in her grasp. She knew she needed to frame this rally not as a movement to be feared, but as an ideology that was already failing. Look at this rally, she continued, pointing to the images on the screen. Look at the faces of those who still believe in Hargrove's rhetoric. What you're seeing is not a revolution, it's a last-ditch effort to cling to a dying ideology. We've seen this before in history. These movements come and go, but they never last. And I promise you, this one won't either. She turned toward the cameras, addressing the nation directly. The American people have seen what happens when you let hatred and division run rampant. We've had enough. We will not allow the forces of chaos to dictate our future. We will not allow the broken promises of false leaders to lead us astray. We stand united. The press conference ended, but the media coverage continued to spread her message far and wide. Her words resonated across the country, especially as Hargrove's rally devolved into chaos. Without his charismatic leader, the remnants of the Red Wolf movement were splintering, and Bondi's stance had only solidified her reputation as a formidable force for order. But Bondi knew better than to celebrate. She had made a statement, yes, but the fight for the nation's future was still ongoing. There were still factions to disband, individuals to prosecute, and ideologies to dismantle. The Red Wolf movement may have been fractured, but Bondi was prepared for the long haul. She turned away from the television screen in her office, the echoes of the rally's collapse still ringing in her ears. This isn't over, she whispered to herself. Not by a long shot. The future was in her hands, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. The next few weeks were a blur of press conferences, meetings, and behind-the-scenes action. Pam Bondi's grip on the situation tightened. The remnants of the Red Wolf movement were scattered, but they were dangerous, and she knew it was only a matter of time before some other radical leader tried to seize the spotlight. Bondi's strategy was simple: expose them for what they were. She focused on discrediting every member of the movement, uncovering connections, infiltrating their ranks, and pulling them apart from the inside. As a former prosecutor, she knew how to play the long game. And now, she had the resources to ensure that no radical would ever be able to rise to power under the banner of chaos again. One evening, Bondi was sitting in her office, the weight of the past few weeks settling on her shoulders. The media storm had quieted down, but she knew the hardest work was yet to come. She had taken down Hargrove, but now she was targeting his supporters. It was the final phase of the operation. Her phone buzzed, and her eyes flicked to the screen. It was an encrypted message from one of her trusted operatives. The subject, final evidence, Red Wolf leader in hiding. Bondi opened the message. It was clear and concise. An underground network of Red Wolf sympathizers had been located, and their leader, someone who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes after Hargrove's fall, was hiding in plain sight. The piece of evidence her team had uncovered was damning, a video link showing a key figure in the movement, someone who had been helping to coordinate rallies and fund the extremists' efforts. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She knew this was her chance to deliver the final blow. If she could expose this person, she could wipe out any remaining hope the radicals had of regrouping. And with their financial and organizational network shattered, the Red Wolf movement would finally be no more. The following day, Bondi appeared before a live press conference. The air was thick with anticipation, as the media knew she was about to make a major announcement. This would be her final strike against the movement. "Good afternoon," Bondi began, her voice calm but commanding. "As many of you know, the so-called Red Wolf movement attempted to undermine our nation by spreading divisive, extremist rhetoric. And though their leader, Kyle Hargrove, has been neutralized, we have reason to believe that another figure has been operating in the shadows, continuing their work and threatening our safety." The room was silent. Reporters leaned forward, eager to hear what would come next. Bondi paused for effect. "Today, I am revealing the true leader of this movement. The person who pulled the strings behind Hargrove and funded the chaos. The man who thought he could continue the destruction Hargrove started. His name is Richard Sinclair." She clicked a button, and the screen behind her flickered to life, showing a grainy, covert video. On the screen was a man with a cold, calculating expression, Richard Sinclair, the shadowy figure who had masterminded the behind-the-scenes operations of the Red Wolf movement. The audience gasped as they saw the footage of Sinclair meeting with known radicals, coordinating financial exchanges, and discussing plans to reignite the movement in the wake of Hargrove's downfall. The video evidence was irrefutable. The man Bondi had just named was the true architect of the extremist network. Bondi's voice rang out, cutting through the stunned silence. This man, Richard Sinclair, thought he could escape the consequences. He thought he could hide in the shadows while continuing to manipulate and destabilize our country. But today, we end that. The Red Wolf movement is finished. The press conference erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions as the weight of Bondi's revelation set in. But Bondi stood firm, unwavering. She had done what she set out to do. Sinclair's arrest was imminent, and with his capture, the last vestiges of the Red Wolf movement would crumble. In the days that followed, Sinclair was apprehended by federal agents. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His network of supporters was dismantled piece by piece, and the movement he had tried to resurrect was permanently silenced. Hargrove's name was slowly erased from the public consciousness, and with Sinclair in custody, there would be no further spark for the radicals to fuel. Bondi had won. The Red Wolf movement was nothing more than a footnote in history, a failed attempt at stoking fear and division. Pam Bondi sat in her office once more, watching the news reports covering Sinclair's arrest, her lips curling into a small, satisfied smile. The country was safe. The radicals had been crushed. And now, the nation could finally start healing from the wounds that had been opened by those who sought to tear it apart. She leaned back in her chair, looking out at the skyline, knowing the battle for the country's future was far from over. But for now, she had delivered the final blow to those who had threatened its stability. And in that moment, she knew she had secured her place as a defender of order, a protector of the nation's future. The radicals were gone. And she had made sure they wouldn't rise again.